I'm going to talk about the value of interventions, the importance of evidence, creating professional learning communities, and working to scale. So why interventions? I just want to underscore how important this is, especially today. No matter where I go, whatever part of the world I'm in, everyone is asking for the same things. They want to be able to have evidence to be able to make decisions for supporting certain kinds of activities. And we have to applaud OECD and especially this program that Stefan leads because of the fact that he has really put a lot of support, encouragement into development of interventions, and these interventions do follow a specific design. So I just would like to say a few words about the criteria for testing an intervention. And these are the ones that are becoming increasingly worldwide. And I think that everyone in the room, regardless of how you feel about these issues of social and emotional learning, creativity, etc., that it is important to raise again these things. The first is that an intervention has to be theoretically grounded. There have to be assumptions about the impact, and that requires the pre-registration. And pre-registration is something that's in the US, and now it's something in the UK, so that you have to have what you are going to say is your main effect. Then how do you measure it? And then you have to have a power effect, and there's different ways of doing that, and you can register it with using the optimal design software. And then you have to have those sound measures of face and content validity, and the next generation of science standards, and it's the rubrics that get developed to support that are really important. Our book kind of makes that, helps make that bridge. You have to have reliable measures and tools. You have to be able to do that to make your claims about the intervention effects. And then you have to have a rigorous analytic program. And that goes for whether you're doing interviews, whether you're doing observations. It doesn't really matter. You have to have these claims, and the claims have to be sound. Our goal was basically to increase engagement in science environments. This is the whole project that we've been doing for 5 years now, funded by the National Science Foundation, which I explained before. And what we did, and which is very similar with what the innovation program did, is first we had a project-based design principled model. Then it was very much focused on this idea of figuring out phenomenon, integrating three-dimensional learning. These are disciplinary core ideas, cross-cutting concepts, and scientific practices to make sense of phenomena. So, in other words, what did we do? Our challenge was to build an environment that basically did these principles that are related to project-based learning. This was our challenge. These are the things that we said we were going to do and we were going to accomplish. And we did this in this, first started with a development, then we had a field test trial, and now what I'm going to be talking about is our cluster randomized trial, which is what we call an efficacy study, and how we are hoping to be able to move to scale. The efficacy study here is large. It has to be. We have 130 teachers in both Michigan and California. We have 70 schools. We have over 8,000 students that were randomized into 2 groups. This year we're following them again to look at the effect of the control teachers. Do they look like the treatment effect that we saw the first year? So our system, very much like the system that OECD has, is basically to have these very highly developed specified educative teacher materials, educative materials for the students. We have professional learning supports, And we have assessments. We have assessments at the end of every of the units that we developed. And we developed 3 units in chemistry and 3 units in physics for high school students. These post-test scores at the end of each of these units have rubrics. They have scores. Our assessments are constructed response assessments. That means that it's a very difficult process. We have 35,000 different constructed responses on the basis of just one of our post-test scores. So what does that mean? It means that we went to AI, and we've now started to work with machine learning on our constructed responses, and we have students from our physics lab that are helping us because they're also helping us try and be able to develop new algorithms by which we're going to be able to look at modeling. These are changes in diagrams, changes in explanations, to be able to think more clearly, to be able to have more reliable data on the basis of these constructed responses. Let me just say that when you go to machine learning, we have found that the systems, you're still doing exactly the same kinds of things that you do when you score independently. You're still having to randomize and bring out the scores. You're still having to take those scores and develop IRRs and a rate of reliability, and then you're going to have to move into some kind of interclass correlation by which you understand, are your scores really within the range that you expected them to be in light of their student responses. So all of this is taking place in the context of being able to look at a formative assessment, but then we also have a summative assessment that we did not develop. So this is an objective assessment that someone else developed so that we can look at not only the main effect, which is the difference between the treatment and control condition, but how well do our treated students look with respect to certain aspects of the summative test. So what is driving all of this? What's driving all of this is that you have to ask a meaningful question. Why do, for example, why do I feel colder when I'm wet than when I'm dry? What is the reason for all of these things? And then part of that meaningful question comes into our model of engagement. Our model of engagement is based on these social and emotional measures. So here again, we're trying to look at social and emotional measures. One is that we think about the properties of engagement, our interest, and I don't mean do you like science? No. A meaningful, purposeful, like how important is science to me in my life? Maybe it's not important. But we have certain questions that ask about that. Then we look at their skill level, what kinds of skills do they have? And then the challenge. And the challenge, thank you, Paul, is the most important part of what we're really trying to get at. It has to be something you don't know, so it puts you in a little bit of vulnerability, but something you can reach for, something you might be able to solve. But remember, you are solving. The whole system is changed. The students are asking the questions. The teachers are moved away. And the first thing they learn is to stop talking, put their hand over their mouth and wait for the kids to give the questions they want to answer. And then how do we check these things? We look at them in terms of positive affect enhancers. Are you enjoying it? Do you feel successful? Are you confident? Then we also look at detractors. So if you're not engaged, what might be the reason? Are you confused? Are you bored? And then we also look at that little thing called anxiety, like, does that push you ahead? You have to have just that little bit of anxiety to be able to push yourself forward. And then we relate that all to questions about science learning. And for our model is our science learning in the context of both social and emotional development as well. So we're looking at both the issues of, one, academic performance and academic performance as it relates to social and emotional learning. This project-based learning principles is developed by my colleague, Joseph Krajcek, and his colleague, Shin. This has been in a number of different publications. I'm not reading. You can read quickly. So I want to move, because I'm watching the time, on the ESM measures. This is an experience sampling method. This is how we measure social and emotional learning. We measure it through a phone. It is randomly put together. The phone is an app that was developed by an engineer at Google. He worked with me. He heard me give a presentation once, and he said, "Barbara, I've developed just what you needed." And since that time, I've learned how to develop my own app. But this is Paco. If you want to take out your phone right now, you could look at Paco. You can get it on the web. It's open source, and you can do it all yourself. And it's a way to have repeated measures on social and emotional facts. So you have to develop, of course, your own instrument. But then you can collect this information. We collect this information on the teachers. We collect this information on the students. We get profiles of the teachers. We get profiles of the students, and we relate them to situations that are occurring within the classroom. So what we want to understand, what is your social and emotional background? What does it look like in the context of doing these project-based learning activities? When you're building a model, how does that look next to when listening to the teacher lecture, or when you're writing an explanation? And so these are things that we are able to do. We're able to look at your rise to challenge, and these are repeated measures. So this is not something like a survey that you ask once. This is something that you get over and over again. So we have roughly, in any one particular go-around, we'll have as many as 30,000 little of these beeps that will tell us how kids are feeling, and then we analyze them. So this is what it looks like. What I did here is so that people that are very much engaged in OECD and the kinds of things that OECD does is how many of these kinds of measures we replicate from other kinds of studies in addition to the ones that we have developed ourselves. And these are ones that I have spent the last 25 years working on, thinking about and trying to make them, how you use my imagination, how I solve problems, how I solve different points of view, how do I make connections with school subjects. So that these are things that we look at in the context of the app. It's on their phones. We, of course, have institutional review board, and we are able to take care of all those things. So I've gone through that, but I just want to kind of talk these last few minutes about the professional learning community. I know there are a lot of people here that are very interested in what we do with our teachers. We really want to help our teachers with two things. It isn't just the pedagogy. We find that many science teachers, especially at the secondary level, are not science teachers. They come from other areas. They're a little bit vulnerable about their ability to teach science. So we really focus on the content. We really want to be able to help them with scientific practices and to be able to reflect on their practice. Because it's essential that if you do not reflect on your practice, you cannot move forward. And then we want them to collaborate. So our teachers, they work with us on our units. They're the people that validate us. They look at everything that we do. They get involved in everything. They score. We have observations. We go into classrooms. We have very long observation schedules. The schedules are very different. They're not frequency, like how often does a teacher do this? No. We're really trying to get at a very deeper learning of understanding how figuring out is happening in classrooms. So we have behavioral measures that look at that. And then this whole observation schedule and an exit survey are mediators in our models, and they become our fidelity of implementation, our ability to understand, did the teacher actually engage in project-based learning, and are these the effects that we're getting? What do? We have summer institutes, face-to-face interactions, virtual conferences, and a 24-hour kind of hotline that we have somebody answering questions because we have to give the materials to the schools. And what the most important part of what we do with the teachers is every lesson that we have developed, the teachers have to do before they teach the lesson. So what you see here is an experiment we do with sodium. This is a teacher who didn't want to do the experiment, and so basically we encouraged her to do the experiment, and you can see how she starts to join the group, and then at the end, when she has the explosion of the sodium in water. The idea here is why, and the questions that is being asked is, how come you can put salt on your food and nothing happens to you, but yet when you put sodium in water, you get these explosions? And so essentially, for those of you who aren't familiar with this particular sequence. So this is what we do. So our professional development is not standing up and standing here. You walk into the lab, you get a lab coat, you get a pair of glasses, and you have to do it all. And the idea is you have teams. Sometimes you're working with 4 or 5 people. Sometimes you're working with a partner. You're doing modeling. You're doing experiments. You're on the internet, so that everything that goes on is that you are becoming that student in that classroom, so that when you go to teach those things, you can teach them. So this just gives you a little picture of what goes on in our professional learning workshops, and then what's happened. And I promised you, so this is brand new. I mean, it's only 2 weeks. So, 2 weeks since we were public. We have a main effect. We have a main effect, an academic main effect. Now, this is a huge thing for somebody to have an academic main effect of 1/4 of a standard deviation, which means that a high school student in physics will go from failing to passing, from a C+ to a B-. We are overjoyed. I've been doing intervention work my whole life. I have never had something like this happen to me, and I'm still kind of walking on air. And we looked at some other things because we had exploratory things that we wanted to find. So what did we find? Well, we raised imagination and a desire to take on challenging problems to figure things out. That was another thing that we were not expecting. We saw increases in the treatment and control condition for kids that want to study science and pursue it in college and later careers. And then our teachers, their engagement with scientific practices was just over the board. And I have to say that everybody who starts this is very much what you've heard in the last 2 days. I don't think I'm gonna like this. The smart kids, the first thing they do, why are you doing this? I can read the textbook. I don't need to do this. How am I going to get an A on the exam? The teacher, I don't think I know how to do this. I mean, what am I supposed to do? What if no one asks me a question? At the end of it, everybody comes through a kind of transformation that basically you kind of think that isn't going to happen, but it happens. They get excited. They go through it. We did not have one teacher that dropped. Not one teacher dropped in the whole experiment, except someone who got sick, someone who got transferred to another class, and someone whose school went on strike, and basically they had real issues coming back to school. Those were the kinds of reasons that we lost any of our teachers, and we lost not even 1% of them. So this has really been a very exciting path for me, and I'm very excited to be able to stand here and tell you it works. It works. You can raise content, and you can do it as you're increasing the social and emotional development of both your teachers and your students. Thank you.